We'll start by reading our summary that we came up with last week of Genesis 33 to 35. So the title we had was Esau is nice, but Jacob moves on. Dinah is defiled. Shechem slaughtered. Bethel blessing, and Rachel R.I.P. So Jacob meets Esau. Jacob and Esau reconcile. Jacob leaves. Esau goes home. Jacob bought near Shechem. Jacob builds an altar at Shechem. The rape of Dinah by Shechem. Dinah's brothers are outraged. All the men of Shechem were circumcised. Simeon and Levi slaughter the whole town. Fear of God fell on all the surrounding nations. Jacob returns to Bethel and is blessed, and he builds an altar. Rachel gave birth to Benjamin. Rachel dies and is buried on the side of the road from Bethel to Bethlehem. Jacob makes it back home. Isaac dies, and Esau and Jacob bury him. So I thought that was a really good summary last time, guys. Good job. This time, nobody gave me a title, so we did not do as good a job this time. So now you have nothing to remind you what we talked about last time. You're going to have to think about it. So Genesis 36, which was the descendants of Esau. And then we just barely got started in the Joseph story because I talked too long about history. But I will try to remedy that today. We'll get into Joseph today. So, what happens first in Genesis 36?
Descendants of Esau.
Yep, I think it's about all that happens. Anything you guys remember from the history we went over last time that maybe we could just record here?
Jesus.
Jesus, all right. I'll just put that in. That's always your answer. You give that answer in church, you always win, right?
Thanks for putting that summary on there too. That was helpful.
Good. All right. So we had the descendants of Esau. So last time we did talk about the Amalekites, right? Yes. So that's one we could remember. Amalekites.
You want descendants instead of deceives?
No, I intended to spell that. I misspelled Amalekites too. It still thinks it's misspelled. Misspelled his. Wow, not my day today. I'm going to say Amalekites harass Israel and God wipes them out eventually. Jesus is, how about we expand on your Jesus theme? Jesus is persecuted by the eventual descendants of Esau. Which were the Herods.
That's why it wasn't specifically in the text, but the Herod lineage and all that was really useful.
Yeah, good. The Idumeans, yes. Okay. Anything else from 36? It's not super exciting. Anybody have a favorite name from 36? Any favorite names you could put in here?
Agag.
Huh?
Agag.
Agag? Oh, Agag.
He's the one who got spared, right?
Yeah, A-G. So that's Haman the Agagite. I'll put that. That's why that one becomes important. And Esther. Descended from Amalek. Amalekite king Agag. Very good. What else? Ready to jump into 37? What happens in 37?
Joseph has a dream.
Very good. And then what?
His brothers get jealous.
Joseph's brothers hate him.
Yes.
It says first they hate him, and then they hate him even more after the second dream.
Yeah, but Joseph's more of a lighter version.
They threw him in a well.
Threw him in a pit.
Should start off with Joseph was the favorite.
Hmm?
Start off with Joseph was the favorite.
Joseph was the favorite. Right? and who
Somebody sold him.
somebody saw.
Somebody.
They, I'm gonna put they, pulled him out. Did anybody get a definitive answer for themselves this week, or did I simply add to the confusion by looking through who pulled him out of the well?
I think between Steve and James, it was just good, like, whether they sold them or not, the intent was to sell them, so who cares?
I agree with that.
Honestly, it's just, honestly, it's easier to suggest the brothers sold them.
Yeah, so I think after the discussions and stuff, that we're good. I love those kinds of things in Slack. That gets us all thinking and into the text. And, you know, for me, I think I'm coming down the side of the brothers. That the Midianites and the Ishmaelites were part of the same group. And so they're kind of using the terms interchangeably. Even though Midian was a descendant of Keturah, right? It was Abraham's other wife. And Ishmael was the descendant of Abraham and Hagar. So they were sort of brother lines, but they weren't Ishmaelites. That makes the most sense to me, but the text is definitely not clear when it just says the Midianites came by and they pulled him out of the pit. So, but don't let me decide that because I don't actually know the actual answer. Okay. All right. Anything else, guys? I think that's where we left him. Okay. So, I feel it appropriate to start with a picture of a pit. This is where poor Joseph got left when we left last week. If we had only made it a little farther, he might have got out of there sooner.
That looks lovely.
Yeah, doesn't that look fun? Could you imagine the poor kid down there and what you don't see in there is in the middle of the desert, a hole in the ground. What do you think accumulates in there?
Probably rats.
Spiders
Probably
and
rats.
snakes. So the poor kid's down there surrounded by spiders and snakes and bugs and creepy, crawly, awful things. Has no idea when the brothers are pulling him out. They go eat lunch while he's down there screaming.
Did they just,
there's
did
probably
they just throw him in, or did they let him down with a rope? Because that's an awfully long way to just.
That's a good question. It had to be far enough down he couldn't just like jump out, so it had to be something about that. I mean, these cisterns do tend to be pretty deep like that, the ones that are in that area. So
there's probably definitely rats in there.
yeah, it could be. I don't know. It's desert, so I don't know if they. Well, not totally. Depends on where exactly they're at.
How devoted are you to teaching? You can show us an example.
An example you want? No, I do remember there was some guy. I wish I could remember the poor guy's name back in the like persecution of the church days. That somebody threw the guy in a pit like that for like 3 years. He had to live in this poor pit. So I don't know if that was because of Joseph or what. The martyrs of the church had a hard time. All right. Anyway, so this is where Joseph is at. So we'll get into today's story here. We're going to start where we left off, Genesis 37:29. Why do we have so much Joseph's story? I pointed out last time that more of Genesis is devoted to Joseph than any other character, really. That not even Abraham had nearly as much as Joseph. I think the answer is that the first audience of this book, right? Moses wrote it. Who's reading it first? The people who escaped from Egypt, right? Their primary concern is, why did we end up here for 400 years stuck in slavery, and why do we have any hope that what Moses is doing is going to actually work? And so that's why you need so much of this Joseph story. Those people, that's what they're going to care about the most from this whole lead up into this point, is how did we end up in Egypt and why are we leaving now? Joseph is sort of like you put yourself in the mindset of these people. Joseph is like their George Washington to us, except 150 years more. Like the U.S. is only 250 years old. So as far back as George Washington is, he's myth. Joseph is this weird myth for them, right? Because he was leading Egypt, but he's the reason they're slaves now, right? Like that's why we're in Egypt. So it had to be this weird love-hate thing with our history of we had this amazing guy in our history, but yet we're still here as slaves because of him. And to give you an idea, 400 years, right? U.S. is 250 years old. What was happening 400 years ago? That's the story that these guys are getting. So 400 years ago, Shakespeare died. Galileo was in prison. There was a war called the 30 Years' War. I don't know if anybody even remembers that or what happened in that war. It happened after a very famous event called the Defenestration of Prague. Defenestration, I don't know why they named it that. It means throwing people out of a window. I didn't know we had a word for that, but now that we do, you can throw people out windows too and say, defenestration! The Protestants took two priests and threw them out a window in the city of Prague, and it started an entire European continent-sized war between everybody, the Catholics and the Protestants. And the reason the war ended was the king of Sweden, a guy named Gustavus Adolphus, invented modern warfare. Nobody had done like mobile artillery and fast-moving mobile units and things like that before that. And he invented it at 16. He won his first battle at age 16, he's the king of Sweden, and because of his military prowess, he settled the war for basically the Protestants, and that war is the reason we have the idea of separation of church and state. That war is why you got secularized Europe that kind of cast off most of the religion that we see today. And so Gustavus Adolphus, a guy you've never heard of, is like Joseph for these people.
Okay, right.
He had a significant impact on your life and the way we even see the world. And we don't remember him. That's how long ago 400 years is for these guys. And so that's the story we're getting into.
Also,
Sure.
if a guy was named Adolphus, you said today they would be teased in school pretty bad.
Well, that's true, but if you'd have lived back then, your name probably would have got teased too, because that was their culture, right? So.
Maybe.
All right, let's go. So 37, verse 29. Reuben returned to the pit, and he saw that Joseph was not in the pit. He tore his clothes and returned to his brothers, and he said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" Meaning, I'm in charge, guys. Like, I'm dead. I'm a dead man. Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments, put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, and he said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So the sons don't technically lie here, right? They don't tell Joseph what happened. I'm not sure that matters, but they don't lie. Joseph jumps to all the conclusions. So they are, however, needlessly cruel. Instead of, "Oh, Dad, we didn't mean for this to happen," like, it's just, "Identify this tunic, Father." How mean could they be to this guy? But on the other hand, their dad didn't like them very much. He spent all his time doting on Joseph, so I'm sure they had a grudge. There is a little bit of justice, as bad as it is for Jacob, that he got deceived by a goat, though, right? He deceived his father by cooking a goat and putting goat skin on his arms, and now basically the same thing has happened to him. A goat's blood has deceived him about the death of his own son. It does say, Kristen asked a couple weeks ago about, do they know there's no daughters when they were at Shechem? There are daughters, there apparently are daughters, and it just doesn't mention them in the text. We don't know how many or their names or anything, so there are daughters.
To be fair, old stories barely mention women.
Yes, that is true in the Old Testament. So, now where it says the Midianites sold him in Egypt, I mentioned last time that the actual Hebrew word is toward. So that even adds to the confusion. The Midianites sold him toward Egypt. And so it's later on, when he gets to Potiphar, it's going to say the Ishmaelites sold him to Potiphar. So that's one more reason to think maybe it's just the same group. All right, so chapter 38. Now we get an aside, okay? We just finished with Judah being the one to suggest we sell him into slavery. And now we're going to get two parallel stories that take place at the exact same time. Our characters in the narrative have split, and we're going to now get Judah's story over this time period and Jacob's story over this time period. And so that's why this is here, because if you took 38 out and you just put 39 right after this, we're just continuing right after Joseph got taken to Egypt, now he gets sold to Potiphar. Like the story would just continue. So we just have this little aside into, well, what's happened to Judah in that time? Because he's the guy who came up with the idea of selling him into slavery in the first place. So 38, it happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name Er. She conceived again and bore a son, and called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chizib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. And then Judah said to Onan, "Go in to your brother's wife, and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he went in to his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground, so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house until Shelah my son grows up," for he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. So timeline-wise, Joseph is works with Potiphar 11 years. Then he's 2 years in prison, that's 13 years. And then there's 7 years of plenty before his brothers come to see him in Egypt. So we're about 20-year period that Joseph is going to be in Egypt before he's reunited with the brothers. Judah here, he has 3 boys. Let's say this takes about 5 years for this to happen. The typical marrying age at that time was about 15. So the boys would have gotten married at about 15. So when Onan dies, and Shelah's not old enough yet, he was born at the end of the 5-year period of the 3 boys, then that means he was about 10. So we're waiting about 5 years until they get married, until they would have gotten married. And so that ends up, for him to get to 15, that's the 5-year period plus 15 years, that'd be 20 years. So the very end of this story in 38, when Joseph spares Tamar, is right before they're about to go to Egypt to see their brother Joseph, that they don't know is their brother Joseph. So that's the timeline of what we're reading right here. These are happening perfectly in parallel. You do get the sense that probably the reason, this thing starts with Joseph left his family, right? And so his family's down here, they live in Hebron, this area. He left. He went up. And it says he was in Chizib when Shua had the one child. Hiram the Adulamite, this was Adullam right here. And so he left and moves up here. And it doesn't give you the sense that he has really any contact with his family at all at this point. I think they probably half blamed him for what ended up happening to Joseph and how it tore their family apart. To give you an idea of where they were before, I didn't show you guys this last time. When it said that they were pasturing their flocks by Shechem, so Jacob, the family down here in Hebron, they were up here and supposed to be up here in Shechem, and they had essentially taken off and headed to the city of Dothan, because I'm thinking they wanted to party or something like that up there, and that's why when Joseph comes and finds them there, they're not supposed to be there. And so they're thinking Joseph's going to go back and tell Dad again, because we already know he's a tattletale. And so the Midianite traders, if they were leaving the hill country of Gilead, the King's Highway and the Via Maris, there are 4 major linking roads that go sideways. So this linking road right here that crosses the Jordan, I'm approximating this is probably the path they took, that they would have crossed the Jordan there, and the only way they're coming down through Dothan is that they decide they can cut the corner here instead of going straight over to the Via Maris. So odds are that's why the traders are coming. They're coming from Gilead, down through Dothan, over to here. All the brothers come back home to Hebron, and Judah, I think out of guilt or just he's sick and tired of the family and everything, ends up back up here in Chizib and Adullam. So that's where he's at. Now he does marry a Canaanite, and that's forbidden in Deuteronomy. They have a family history of not marrying Canaanites, and he completely ignores that. I think this is a sign he's throwing off his family's lineage and everything, and just he's going to go do his own thing. And so we get to Er. Er is the first human put to death individually for being evil. We lost everybody in the flood, like corporately, as all of humanity, but he's the first guy that God kills for being evil, and it doesn't tell us what he did. And Onan's the second guy that got killed for being evil. What Onan was commanded to do was to marry Tamar, right? To give a child to Tamar so that his brother's line could carry on. So they call that levirate marriage. Or levirate. If you hear levirate marriage, it's the idea that your brother-in-law has to marry the woman of the dead man. And it's called that because this word levir is the word for brother-in-law in Latin. So it literally just means brother-in-law marriage.
Glad we don't have to do that today.
Well, so, and there's a couple ways of looking at this. Culturally, this was the thing. We see this probably half and half as, oh my goodness, they forced the poor woman to marry this guy that's not the guy she married in the first place. Like, it was really important when you were courting somebody to look at how their brothers behaved, because you might be married to them one of these days. It would have really changed like family Christmases and Thanksgivings at that time, right? But I'm not so sure that was the case. Like, Tamar's mad that she didn't get to do this. You know, I think that it was much more for the protection of the women. It was how they got a son. Remember we talked last time? The sons were really their only unconditional love in this culture at the time. And Tamar really wants a son. Like, that's what she goes out of her way to do. And so I'm not so sure that it was a slave sentence for the woman as much as it was actually to the female's benefit in this culture. But Onan won't do what he's supposed to do. What is Onan's sin that he's put to death for? We have a word for what, there's things that have come to us through Christian history that I just don't understand how they got here. The word for Onan's sin that we use often is onanism. If you've never heard of it, it's the PG form of self-gratification, so to speak. I'm not going to use the actual word, but we call it onanism because of Onan. I do not know why, because that's not what was happening here. Onan was sleeping with Tamar. That's what it says. And he got what he wanted from her, but he would not let her conceive. Right? Onanism is not what was happening here, and that's not what he got put to death for. He got put to death because he wouldn't give his brother an heir. Now what we don't know from the story is, did he do that? Because, I mean, it said his brother was so evil God put him to death. Was he evil to Onan? Was Onan like, heir was awful, I don't want to give him anything? Or was Onan also awful and saying, if I give my brother an heir, I have to split the inheritance? And in fact, heir was firstborn. So the boy I'm about to father is going to end up getting all the stuff. And if there is no boy, I get all the stuff. We don't really know, it doesn't say. Since God put Onan to death, I suspect it's the latter. Onan was completely selfish. And he was preventing Tamar from the one thing that she had left to look forward to in life, was having that son. And it's at this point that it completely struck me that brothers in Genesis stink.
Yes.
Ishmael makes fun of Isaac. Jacob steals Esau's blessing. Rebekah's brother Laban takes advantage of her son Jacob. Onan refuses an heir. Joseph's brothers hate him and plot his murder. I should read Genesis to be happy I do not have a brother, I guess. But as I thought through that, though, there is one person in Genesis that I would have liked to have for my brother. If you could pick one person we've read through so far to be your brother, who would you pick?
3 sisters are enough.
Anybody? You're like, I don't want a brother either.
Well, because we have so many kids already, and also that battery is closed according to my mom.
Okay. All right.
Okay, moving on.
Esau. Esau's the only nice brother in Genesis. He never did a single bad thing to Jacob other than showing up with the army, right? If I had to pick a brother, it'd be Esau. Not the guy who comes out the best in the overall picture. But.
Although, honestly, Ishmael did not do anything that bad. Like teasing is what brothers do.
Yes, that is true.
So that bad.
Genesis 38, verse 12. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. We don't actually know where Timnah is. I looked, and there's like 6 different possibilities for Timnah, and so I have no places for you in this. But it's in this region of Cheez-It. Oops. That's going to come up periodically because my computer has issues at the moment.
It's okay, we all do.
So he's down in this region up here.
Oh.
So, and when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. We also don't know where Enaim is. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. Then Judah saw her, and he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turns to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come in to you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, well, what will you give me that you may come in to me? And he answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, if you give me a pledge until you send it. He said, what pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. Which means driver's license and all your major credit cards. Like, give me your wallet, and then this will happen, and then you send me the goat later, I'll give you your wallet back. So he gave them to her, and went in to her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away, taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. And when Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adulamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. Hiram has got to be the best friend in the Bible. He gets a very bad job. He's like, Hiram, guess what? Hiram's like, what took you so long, Judah? He's like, well, I had to go to church. It was a cult prostitute. Yeah, Hiram was a cult prostitute. So he returned, Verse 21, and he asked the men of the place, well, where's the cult prostitute who was at Enaim at the roadside? And they said, no cult prostitute has been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Also the men of the place said that no cult prostitute has been here. Judah replied, well, let her keep the things as her own. We'll be laughed at, you see. But you see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her. He's like, hey, I tried. I'll just have to get a new driver's license, call the credit card company, cancel the credit cards. Like, we'll be fine. So this poor girl, Tamar, you learn that she's still wearing widow's clothes years after she's been sent home. When a girl got sent home in this culture, that was the ultimate disgrace. It doesn't tell us that she had anything to do with the deaths of the other 2 sons, but you know, Judah might be a little bit justified in his fear that Tamar's the common denominator. I don't want her with Shelah. I'm going to lose him too, because she was a king. You know, Tamar was a Canaanite too. But she's been stuck in her father's house, living in complete disgrace for all these years. Yes, Dave?
Yeah. So she of course got pregnant like right away, or over a couple of months, like.
Well, I don't think biology worked any different than it normally does in this story. So she got pregnant, but she wouldn't have known it for a little while.
Ah, okay, well.
The story does kind of sound like she conceived and she knew it, and then she got up and left,
like
but that's not.
It usually takes a while.
So, the word used for what Judah thought she was at the beginning is actually the word for harlot, not cult prostitute. But Hiram changes it down at the bottom to cult prostitute. And I don't know if that's because that's what Judah told Hiram, because it was more respectable, a common harlot versus the cult prostitute or not. But we need to understand why the cult prostitute was more respectable than the other prostitute, I think. Because if we read the rest of this Old Testament not understanding this, we will miss a big part of the storyline. So a cult prostitute was somebody who served at the temple for a particular god. Like, their job was to worship the god through sex. And I actually had the AI do a search for me. There are almost no religions that are not Abrahamic in origin that are not hypersexualized. You go to India today, there are temples with cult prostitutes, and that's what they do. it is quite possible that the single greatest innovation that the Torah brought into the world was the desexualization of religion. It's huge. That's why Judah wasn't all that embarrassed to send Hiram back to find the cult prostitute, because that's just how you worship to the local god. The word for cult prostitute in Hebrew is kadesha, it literally means holy woman. We would not call the cult prostitute a holy woman, we would call her an unholy woman. But we would only call her that because of this book, right here. Because this came onto the scene. It's one more reason, I think, if we needed another one, to understand that outside of the Torah-based world, women have a very hard life. Because their husbands were like, honey, I gotta go to church today. I don't really want to do this, but if I don't go do this, our crops won't grow and we'll all starve to death. Because that's how they viewed it. That's why you worshiped those gods. Because then they blessed you by giving you crops and food and wealth and everything else. The belief was the holy women were doing their religious duty. That's why they went there. And the men that frequented them were doing their religious duty. Can you imagine living in a world where men see it as their religious duty to have a series of one-night stands with random prostitutes? That this is what God wants you to do. And you wonder why the Israelites kept falling away from God through the rest of this book. Because the way they worshipped the other gods was sex. They were worshiping the God by doing that. And so between the God who says, you're a sinner, you need to sacrifice to get right with me. You need to follow all these laws to get right with me. And the God that says, you can worship me by having sex with random women, which do you think men would pick if they did not have Christ in their hearts?
Definitely the second one.
Yep, I agree.
Because men are, but
Well,
no offense to anyone in
it's
this
how
room,
we're built.
gross.
Or another way to put it, do you think men would rather go to a strip club or come to church? So we should not be trying to court that side of men and to get them to come to church, by the way. Some churches do. But really, the fact that in your head this is so stark, this is shocking to me as well. The idea that church is the opposite of sex almost, right? Like the idea that church is not sex is the oddity in human history. All of the rest of the world, all of the rest of human history, that was the general belief, to the point that you can't even hardly twist your mind around to think about it. It's embedded in you so deeply. But the rest of the world's religions worshipped goddesses, and when you worshipped goddesses, you got hypersexualized religion. So that's what's going on here with the cult prostitute. That's why he says, oh yeah, it was a cult prostitute, no big deal. And everybody's like, we didn't have one of those here. The men were probably like, I wish we could have one, you know where we could find one? But this is Canaanite culture. All right, so, verse 24. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral, or it's, and moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And in the footnote it says, or by prostitution. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. And as she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. And then Judah identified them. And he said, she's more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not know her again. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out. And she said, well, what a breach you have made for yourself. And therefore his name was called Perez, which means breach. Afterward his brother came out with a scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. I have never delivered human babies. Apparently this must happen a lot if they're there ready with the cord to tie on the hand, because they got to know who the firstborn was. Apparently you get that finger out, you cross the finish line by a hair's breadth. And from there on out, you can do whatever you want. Go back in, yeah, it's fine. Judah's first reaction is to burn Tamar alive. the girl that he has been nothing but mean to this whole time, sent her home in disgrace. This is not the standard punishment for adultery in that world or in the Torah or anything later. Now, the standard punishment is not awesome, but it's not burning alive. He's going above and beyond what he thinks needs to happen to this poor girl. And I wonder if it wasn't Judah's brain saying, finally, she's a problem for me. Now I have an out. I have a way out. We can just kill her now, and then it's done. I don't have to worry about it. Shelah's safe. He can marry somebody else. Good to go. But Tamar, even though she was being pulled out to be burned alive, she does not rebuke Judah publicly. She just sends him a private message to say, whoever owns this driver's license and credit cards is the one that I'm pregnant by. And I'll admit the first, 50 times I've read through this story, I missed the importance of what happened when Judah recognized the staff. I think something broke in Judah. He is not recorded as having done a single bad thing after this incident. And what did Judah do? Judah is the first and one of the few only people in the Bible who fully admits that he did something wrong. Nobody else does that. He does not make excuses. He says, I am a sinner. Full stop. She was better than me. Do you know how hard that is in normal life? That's the one thing I want from my kids most of the time. When you do something wrong, I won't punish you if you'll just admit it. Just say, I'm a sinner. I did the wrong thing. No excuses. The buck stops with me. And Judah did that. And this is right before he goes to Egypt. And in the second round of Egypt, he offers his life for his brother Benjamin's. He took full responsibility here and called off the whole thing. He could have easily put that stuff away, told people she was lying, and burned her anyways. But he said, I'm a sinner. It was me. And we need to remember this, because this is going to be really important, I think, later on as to why we have this little aside about Judah. So let's jump into chapter 39. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. And he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. So Judah had moved north up here. Jacob had followed the yellow path down through the red path all the way down here. We don't actually know where Pharaoh's palace is. The people who study this sort of thing seem to suggest it's there. That's the best possible spot for it. And so he got pulled way down deep into Egypt, right along the Nile. And this is the area that he's living right now. What we're about to see with Joseph, this is the first instance of Joseph essentially thrown in a pit. He's in a bad spot. And he rises through his own abilities, through God's blessing, to essentially be in charge of everything. And then he's going to get thrown in a pit again. And he's going to rise to be in charge of the pit. And then he's going to come out of the pit, and when he's finally set free, he's going to rise to becoming in charge of everything. We're going to see later how Joseph is a type of Christ. There are a lot of things that Joseph's life parallels about Christ, but he is also a mirror of the history of Israel. This is exactly what happens to the Jews. In fact, in Egypt alone, they start out on top, and then everybody gets suspicious of them, and then they're going to cast them into the pit and try to wipe them out, and eventually God's going to rescue them somehow, and they're going to rise back up again. And it could either be because, or it's a combination of God choosing them, and I think it's also because of the culture that God gave to the Jews. Jewish culture has nearly universal marriage. There's not a lot of people who aren't married or young kids who choose not to get married. They have very strong families. Because every kid goes through Hebrew school at a young age, throughout all of history, they were almost universally literate. They all knew how to read. And because of that, like academic study and the life of the mind became very important to all the Jews in all the cultures they were in. And so if you look at any of those properties economically across any groups, that tends to be a strong indicator of success, all of those things. And so it's both that God gave them this culture of studying Torah and having strong families, and that he is blessing them as well. So Joseph is going to pattern that for us 3 times in his life here. But you would think if the people who are going to read this book have escaped 400 years of slavery, they would not be all that willing to depict good Egyptians. And Potiphar, for the most part, is depicted as a good Egyptian. He's a nice guy to Joseph. It's his wife that's the problem. Pharaoh's nice to Joseph. You would think if they were going to write a story that they made up, Pharaoh would be the bad guy all the way through. But no, this Pharaoh's nice. Potiphar's nice. The jailer even is nice. Like, there's a lot of nice Egyptian in here. I think it speaks to the credit of Moses and the Egyptians who escaped that they were willing to do that. But there is definitely a trend here of, when Jacob was in Laban's house was blessed. When Joseph is in wherever he's at gets blessed, right? Potiphar gets blessed, Egypt gets blessed. So if you stop the story here, and you did not know the rest of the book, and you had seen that in each generation God picked one patriarch to pass his blessing down to, you would say that blessing has come to Joseph. The only clue that you have that blessing is not going to flow through Joseph is that Perez came out before his brother. Just like Jacob grabbed onto the heel of his brother to come out, Perez was sort of the same kind of a thing. And it ends up being Judah through which Jesus comes. It is not the guy who ruled all of Egypt through which Jesus comes. It's the first guy who said, I'm a sinner. Full stop. I think that is important. That's why Judah, the line comes through Judah. Because what we saw was full contrition, and it ends up being the number one thing you need to do in the Old Testament. You have to recognize you're a sinner, and then Jesus can save you. But I just thought that was interesting. If you had to guess right now, it's clearly going to Joseph, right? The blessing's clearly going to Joseph. All right, so what time are we at? We're coming up on 10 right now. Well, we'll start into 39. Why not? Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt. Let's see, we're in 39. Joseph was handsome in appearance, in form and appearance. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house. He has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you're his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And she spoke to Joseph day after day, and he would not listen to her, to lie beside her or to be with her. But one day when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, see, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came into me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story. The Hebrew servant who you brought among us came into me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of this house. As soon as the master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, this is the way your servant treated me, his anger was kindled. It does not say who his anger was kindled against. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. So it's a little strange here that Dennis Prager pointed out the gender roles in this story are completely reversed from normal. The woman is in the position of power. She's demanding sex. The man's the subordinate. He's the one that's good looking and the one that refuses. That doesn't happen a lot. I mean, it gives you a sense of the strength of Joseph's moral character. Yeah.
And another thing I notice is, in every other chapter we've read, if the man lies with the woman, it's the woman's fault. In this story, it's not. Like they always consider it the woman's fault if, the guy sleeps with her. It's like, oh, well, she did this, she did that. Then they would, blame the woman for it. Well, now it's like, this is the first time I've seen it where it's the other way around, where it's not the woman's fault, other than when Judah was going to burn.
Yeah, in this case, it was her fault, I guess. But
yeah.
You do get the sense if he had just given in to her, she would have just hid it from her husband and he would have lived happily ever after. Like it probably never would have come about. But I just thought that was very interesting. That's part of what strikes you in this story. But another thing that strikes you in this story is that Joseph, all the other patriarchs had direct contact with God. Joseph never does. He's never recorded as having prayed. He's never recorded as God ever telling him anything. And yet, the reason that he gives to Potiphar's wife that he won't sleep with her is that he's not going to do this evil thing before God. Like, Joseph kept God at the forefront of his life the entire time, even though he had less reason to do so than his fathers that came before him. I mean, if there's anybody in the Bible who should have prayed, you'd think it would be Joseph at the bottom of that pit. Good time to pray. It doesn't mean he didn't pray. It just doesn't record that he prayed, right? He is in the Hall of Faith, though, for his faith. And his entry in the Hall of Faith is because not because of all the stuff he does here, it's because he tells his sons on his deathbed, take my bones back to Israel when God pulls you out of this land. That was the faith that he got remembered for. He did trust God was going to bring them out of Israel, or out of Egypt one day. But I think the big question is, did Potiphar believe his wife? Seems like this is probably not the first time such a thing has happened. I suspect he didn't because the guy's a high-ranking official in Egypt, and Joseph, as much as he liked him, was a slave. A slave violates the master's wife. What's the punishment for that?
Probably death.
Death. He did not put him to death. He put him in the king's prison, the good prison, right? Where the cupbearer and the baker get to go. He ends up rising to power in that prison. I wonder if Potiphar put in a good word for Joseph because how does a prisoner ever even get the opportunity to rise to power in a prison, right? Normally you're just stuck there, and Psalm does say it's not pleasant. Psalms 105 says that his feet were hurt with fetters and his neck was put in a collar of iron. So there was definitely a time period there, at least, where he's in a pit, no sun, for 2 years. That's hard. Iron around his neck, but eventually things get lessened because he helps out the jailer. Although, how do jailers usually want prisoners to help them? By torturing the other prisoners. That's how you rise to power in prison. It doesn't tell us what Joseph did. I don't think that's what he did, but that's the typical way you would do that. So, we'll stop there. We'll pick back up Genesis 40 in 3 weeks because I'm going on spring break vacation for 2 weeks. And so Daniel has got an awesome activity planned for the next couple weeks. So it's very important that you're here for that because I want to see how that goes. So go ahead, Dan. You want to tell them what you have planned?
It's so bad to celebrate. We start the first week. We'll just do review. I got a couple things for that, and then I'm looking for something for the next week to do with Easter. So we'll find something there as well.
So make sure you come. Remember, the point of this class is repetition. It's review. So it's that review that's going to help cement that first part of the story here. And then we'll pick up on Genesis 40. Joseph's going to have to stay in prison for 3 weeks. So I'm sorry, Joseph, but we'll get him out of there eventually.